Okay. Oh, the update. It's all brand new. So this morning, most of the citizens of the United States of America have arisen and jumped on their phones at some point, maybe first thing. Not healthy, folks, but this is how many of us live to discover who was elected president of the United States. And for many, I would probably, for the majority of people in this country, it was a yay. And for a slim minority of people, it was a oh no. And let's be honest, in both of those groups, most of it was huh or oh. There's probably more of that, even more prevalently. But at least at the edges of those who consider this an important thing, um, high highs, low lows spread across the landscape. I don't know how you, dear listeners, fared in your selection. Did your candidate win? My candidate did not win. I'm pretty used to that feeling. I've never picked a winning uh, presidential candidate because I don't vote as a in the realm of sports betting. And there's never been a major candidate who I thought was worthy of anyone's votes. But surprise, surprise, tens of millions of people picked otherwise. So today on Totally Classic, where Andy, who tends towards being a progressive, and myself tends towards being an independent, we talk about things every episode that people say you probably shouldn't talk about. We talk about the kind of topics that many people have divorced their families over. We consider that a poor choice for most, if not all. So we're going to talk about these things. And today we're going to ask the question in light of everything that transpired last night and was declared over around 2:30 this morning. Are we doomed? Question mark.
Dum, dum,
Oh.
dum.
What is your first answer to that, Andy Swindler? What's your before we start riffing through it? What is your feeling? Do you feel doom? Is doom within you? Is doom around you?
A lot of sadness with people I hang out with. I don't believe we are doomed in the traditional sense of that word. Maybe in the Indiana Jones sense of that word, but not the actual sense.
Yeah, some mild malfeasance, maybe a heart
Meaning that
torn out.
meaning that some white dude will probably come save us.
He will. Maybe he'll have a cool fedora and a whip. Funnily enough, Indiana Jones jumped into the political chat for the first time I ever remember seeing him do so about a week ago. And that, let me just, since that occurred to my brain, I've seen a lot of people highlighting that this morning as one of the I'm going to start on the positive because that's not where my brain tends to go, although it has in this particular episode, since I knew I had this question in my mind from when you proposed it a week or so ago. Even like filtering through everything that happened last night with that in mind, the first thing to bring up that we can discuss that I think helps us not be doomed is many people are calling this election the death of the celebrity political endorsement. And I think that would be an enormous positive. We saw the likes of Taylor Swift, Beyonce, like gargantuan, towering figures in pop culture come out in favor, in open endorsement of Kamala Harris. And we saw a cavalcade of like Hollywood celebrities. And I would say the drippiest trickle of celebrities like coming out in support of Trump. Now, I think I think that's a glaring problem, and it creates a false apprehension of the world around you. Um, but I think that would be the positive is that I don't think there's any way that you can say that Trump won the celebrity endorsement. What's the word? Metric. as a presidential candidate, and yet he clearly at this point won the popular vote and the Electoral College, and Republicans have taken control of the Senate, and they may have control of the House. Meaning, as far as a referendum from the citizenry, that winning that metric does not seem to have, at the very least, provided a victory. And I think that's helpful because I don't think being led around by celebrity endorsements would be a positive. I think that would be closer to doom. So in some ways, that's a positive sign that we're not doomed.
Hmm. So you think because they didn't work, we'll see fewer of them?
I'm hopeful. Now, this expects people to actually look at the past and course correct, which does happen to a certain degree, I think, more in political campaigns than it does in actual politics. Like when people are in office, there's very little of looking back and apologizing and fixing. Um, but we saw in this election, we saw a course correct already occur uh, in terms of internal use by Democrats of the racist term Latinx. That was kind of, I mean, I think it's hilarious. It took like 4 years for them to learn the lesson. But we saw that as a potent example. I mean, there was actually like science published, social science published, to suggest it's one of the reasons the use of that racist term, Latinx, was one of the reasons, was like a documented reason correlating with the shift of Latin votes to Donald Trump. Um, so I think if they learned that lesson, even if it took them 4 years or whatever, after people already said they were offended by it, um, then hopefully they'll learn the celebrity endorsement lesson as well. In thinking through it last night, and maybe especially you went to an election party, which I'm very jealous of. Um, I very much would like to go to an election party. That sounds more fun than the Super Bowl to me. Um, just because of the likelihood of like provocative argumentation, which is one of my favorite things to engage in. Did you think of anything last night or this morning that helped inform your prior to our conversation conclusion that we are not doomed? What you got?
Well, it's funny. One of the things that makes me think we're not doomed is that we actually had a result the next morning.
Right? Yeah,
I
that is
mean,
helpful.
I think you were saying people were even predicting there's, buckle up. There's no way we're going to see results.
Yeah.
Um, so just in the sense of quote unquote democracy, that seems viable. Um, and for myself personally, uh, something's shifted pretty significantly since the last election. I mean, it wasn't even just a Democratic ticket. It was just like a woke ticket, which is some amalgamation of
Mm,
Democrat and then, basically favoring any identity that I perceived to be marginalized.
mm,
And it's funny, I voted maybe for my first Republican ever.
mm.
um, it was water reclamation here in Cook County, Illinois. And I was, I was researching the candidates and I was like, huh, here's this white male Republican who has like a PhD in, I don't know, environmental studies or chemistry or, something,
Yeah.
working on, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm making some assumptions about water reclamation, but I assume it has to do with science. And
I would assume some form of, yeah, environmental engineering or, yep.
and he was up against an actor.
Oh boy.
Uh,
Another autodidact.
she was a black woman, visibly. And I was like, wow, that's, I mean, yeah, I'm just looking at her resume and being like, what does she know about this thing? You know? So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other dimensions to that in terms of what kind of vote they get. And how they might show up in the city council and blah blah blah. But I was like, as far as I can tell on this one position, this one issue, he seems more qualified.
Yeah.
And that feels like growth for me, you know,
Yeah. Certainly difference. It's fun.
difference.
It's fun to try new things out.
Well,
Um,
we've talked so much about voting identity,
yeah, yeah.
it's like, yeah. Um, and then as I said, quite late in the game, I realized Jill Stein was not on the ballot in Illinois. Uh, that was an assumption had made. So I felt like it was weird. It was a weird moment of like, oh man,
Hmm.
my choices are like really limited. Like,
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't check the ballot in Illinois. Like how I'm kind of shocked Stein wasn't on it. I mean,
no,
she's
it's just
been
Trump
on the
and
ballot for like
Harris and
years.
RFK, just the three of them.
That's it. That's really weird. I find that like, I mean, I'm not trying to go back down a doom road. This isn't an official point, but I find that a little doomy. That like
I put that in the
this,
doom column. Yeah, like just
yeah,
the whole two-party system to begin with is in the doom column. That's a major.
yeah. The Electoral College was not designed to deal with dominant political parties, like this sort of bipartisan spread. This is not part of the system that we designed in this country. It's a system that developed, but it's not, and one could even say evolved, but I would say mostly evolved in the negative sense, meaning you're trying out an adaptation that has been successful in terms of popularity, but I don't think it's been successful in terms of health of the country. But maybe it's just because I've grown up in a contentious time. But yeah, I find that very strange to me, like how the aggressive lawfare that the Democrats engaged in to get like to fight people getting put on ballots and then people not being able to get themselves off ballot. I mean, it's just like the system seems very tight and rigid. And I thought it was super rigid here in North Carolina and that there was only like six options. And then you could write in a short list of official write-in candidates. Um, but I'm used to California where like, Kanye's on the ticket. Like everybody's on the like it's a long list of who's running. Cool. You're in the game. Anybody could win. Anybody's got a puncher's chance. Um, so that's a weird. I don't I don't understand that. I've never had anyone explain it to me as to why to limit um, even the wild west of having why not have a 6-page ballot of 300 different people running for president? Like what problem is that going to cause? I think it would only cause problems to the Republicans and the Democrats, and I don't care about causing them problems. They're just, as we found out, they're private organizations, private corporations, and people don't seem to care when they violate democratic norms. They're like, well, I couldn't even tell you how many different people I've had arguments with about Harris being installed, even though they overturned the results of the popular election successfully in order to do that in a way that had never been done in primary history. And then the media didn't really talk about it. But in talking to people were like, well, it's within the rules. They can do whatever they want. They're a private corporation. They didn't break the rules. I was like, oh my gosh, really? This is the world people live in where they're concerned about what the actual like technical legal rules are? And I understand you want to make rules more just, but just because there is a rule doesn't mean you shouldn't break it. And just because there isn't a rule doesn't mean you should do something. So it's I find it that whole thing very concerning. And I think that permeates the same thing of this like limiting of candidates, especially Stein, who I think looking at her is probably going to be the third biggest vote getter, just as like a brief survey, clicking on all the state results. She was the most consistent. I think Chase Oliver might have been the third in like a state or two, but it was mostly Jill Stein as the next biggest vote getter.
Well,
I
that's
don't get
something.
it. That's something. Okay, what was that kind of maybe that was too doomy to go right to we're not doomed, but it wasn't official. Okay, so here's a well no, let's do a not doomed. All right, so we're not doomed. Um, I am hopeful with the Trump election. Most of my hopefuls, guys, world, are related to the campaign positions of RFK Jr., who I thought was so above and beyond a better candidate than Trump and Harris. Uh, not that I'm saying I would even have voted for him, but just so far, actually, at no point was I going to vote for him. However, a bunch of different focuses of his campaign were like thumbs up, super thumbs up for me. And I'm very hopeful as he is now officially part of the transition team. And there's been dispute about how much influence or what position he's going to get or whatever. But because of him and the thing he came in saying when they like joined forces, um, was a sort of accountability for quote unquote public health, government and government adjacent institutions, but even more importantly, a crackdown or an end to the largest government censorship operation in U.S. history. Um, that that potentially coming to a close, it makes me very hopeful, and I would say we're not doomed, because to me that was uh, like one of the top three um, biggest threats to quote unquote democracy or the republic or whatever, that was occurring over the past 48 years. And so I'm hopeful, and that's a we're not doomed, as that at least there's been lip service and intention to stop something that is uh, a re- it's the biggest attempt to violate the First Amendment that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And so for that to go away as it was enacted under the Biden-Harris administration, I'm very hopeful that would happen. So that's a we're not doomed. And I would even say, even if they end up just lying to us, it is far more likely as the corporate media go ahead, like dies its last death or breathes its last breath, bleeds out on the sidewalk in shame, covered in filth, that they would castigate the Trump Vance administration for doing what Biden Harris did for years and years and years. Like if Trump was sending people all around the internet to be like to get rid of anything that would hurt his presidency or uh, dispute by use of evidence any of his policies, I'm pretty certain that at least MSNBC would be like, "See, we told you he was a fascist." So that to me is like that is one of the biggest "we're not dooms" that I could come up with.
Yeah. Well, I have one. It's another local one for me in Oak Park, Illinois.
Yeah.
But ranked choice voting was on the ballot
Oh,
to elect the village city council. Just the idea of even using
yes.
voting
Yeah.
next time. And to me, like that's it. I think if we actually had ranked choice voting and more than two parties and and maybe, I don't know, I think we should do a whole episode on the electoral college, but
Yeah.
uh things would just be so different, so that
Yeah.
just gives me, and I think it's going to come from local, you know municipalities before it gets big.
I think it's a lot easier to get past, yeah, on a local level than having to, yeah, the degree to which you have to sway people and the number of people you have to sway to make anything happen federally is, as we've just watched, well, if nothing else, it's flipping expensive. I think this was the most expensive, like this is the most expenditure in any election in history. I haven't seen final tallies, but um, I mean, I think for the Democrats, we're talking like $1 billion or something. I mean, like it is gigantic.
Hmm.
Now that's a we're doomed is how much money is flowing through this, like the game part, the like the branding and propaganda part of politics is just so it's bad and it's getting worse, folks. If I was in government, I would absolutely propose a $100 a day limit on all political expenditure for all candidates, all offices. That's it. That's what you're allowed. You can spend $100 a day. And I would even limit it at probably like maybe 1 to 5,000 like valuation in trade. Maybe you get a little bit of flexibility there. The spending $1 billion to try to get elected president is unconscionable. And like convincing other people to give you that amount of money just to run for president. And again, I'm going to highlight Harris because I believe the Democrats like spent more. But anyone could fact check me on that. And B, they lost. So if you spend that much money to fail, that's gargantuan. Now, granted, the Inflation Reduction Act and the COVID stimulus, these bills were like trillions, and those were failures. So much bigger failures than what we're talking about in terms of actual politics. But in terms of this, like what happened last night, are we doomed? I think we're pretty doomed. And we saw this with propositions around the country too. There's like 10 different abortion related propositions around the country, and pro-abortion people outspent their sort of political propagandist adversaries 9-1. Um, so we are continuing. This is kind of like whatever we've seen this was in sports. We see all these things where you're like, well, if people are willing, it's again, it's sort of this classist concern we all have, which is, oh, okay, so the rich, like the richest, now the richest don't always win, but it does seem to give them quite a leg up when you can outspend your opponent. Now, my hope, the positive flip of that is by virtue of the Democrats spending the amount of money that they spent and losing and having lost worse, I believe, again, this isn't, we haven't final tallied everything, but I've seen some reports that Harris did worse in every county, in every state in the entire union than Biden did in 2020. So they spent way, 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 way more. The media was, I would say, even more on their side. And but no, actually, in terms of negativity, positivity, according to some like media watchdog organizations, it was more negative against Trump, more positive for Harris than it was even the last election around. And then they still lost everywhere. Makes me hope that they would be like, let's stop spending so much money. Like this is if we have all these flipping priorities, but this is for both parties. The Republicans, I'm sure they spent whatever 750 million. I'm sure it wasn't much less than the Democrats spent. That's a waste of money. It really is. Like it's not. Again, I've never donated to a political campaign because I think it's as ridiculous. It's probably even more ridiculous than when people ask you to round up at your local grocery store. Um, I don't, and I think having been in a swing state, I've received so much solicitation that I can't. It's very difficult for me to emotionally regulate to respond calmly when I'm solicited yet again. So that's
Yeah.
a bit of a plus and minus.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking a lot lately about AI, and this
Mm,
actually doesn't have anything to do with the election yesterday. But I am convinced at this point that by the next election, AI will render what's left of objective truth meaningless
hmm.
because we'll just be able to create anything, and it'll be basically untraceable. Like any pictures, any videos, anybody
Yeah,
saying what we want, doing what we want.
yeah, yeah. And we don't even need it. I mean, we watched this happen with the media, right? We watched MSNBC be like, they're having a Nazi rally. Remember when Hitler was at Madison Square Garden? They're like, look at these Hitlers filled with Jewish people, whatever. It's just like these are, and people repeated it over and over again. So in some ways, like we're already primed, or the very fine people hoax, or Trump is threatening to have Liz Cheney shot before a firing squad, or what? I mean, it's almost endless the things that people lied about, even when we did have video evidence disproving what they were saying. I mean, AI is good. It's almost going to be too easy. And I don't know if you saw, I sent you the link. I think it was published by the Free Press. They ran, they essentially asked, I don't know, five or six, seven of like the major AI programs, like who would they pick for president? And as we already talked about the racism and political bias of AI in a previous episode, is AI racist? The most of the AIs picked Harris. Now, someone who loves Harris would say, well, right, because AIs are already smarter than most people. Except we already know that they are programmed with political bias. So actually what that reflects is like there's that much political bias existing in these AI systems. So that I mean, I think that should be the thing the Republicans are most afraid of. Is basically we've got AIs, almost every single one of which is biased towards the left, that like that should be they should be scared out of their wits. As basically you've got this massive like coordinate super processing tool in order to basically push propaganda for your side. And I mean propaganda in the broadest sense, not having to be exclusively misleading, because propaganda just doesn't have to. It's just especially so if you use that word. So AI is interesting.
Yeah. And well, I was staying in the doom column for a minute.
Yeah.
And again, really close to home was just the frantic fanaticism that I saw from my 9-year-old stepdaughter
Oh
about
yeah.
Kamala and anti-Trump. Well, I texted you the other day. I said,
Yeah.
"Okay, can you tell me, why is Kamala a good candidate? Can you just
Yeah.
offer me some ideas?" And she basically restated that Trump is bad 3 different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was a huge part of their campaign. So in some
It,
ways, she absorbed the messaging.
exactly. So it was. But as we were saying just before we hit record, like I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, I think getting kids involved in civics early is valuable. Knowing about your world is valuable. I mean, it was
Yeah.
actually she's literally in the fourth grade learning about the Senate, in
Yeah.
the House of Representatives right now. So we were able to, you know, the tiny little attention they gave to those elections, we were able
Yeah.
to talk about it. Um, and yet it's just uh, I don't even know. I'm putting it in the doom column because it's not a real conversation. She's just
Yeah.
absorbed. And I think it was the anxiety and fear
Mm.
around the
Yeah.
election that it was happening for her last night. And then when she woke up and we all like as a family like looked at the results together and she was just like, I'm really afraid. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not invalidating any of that. I'm just saying, like, gosh, uh is that something that should be important to a 9-year-old at this moment?
Yeah. It's sort of sad. To me, it's almost like when you pre-sexualize a child. It's similar where you're like, or I try to guard my daughters from like getting too much into like uh animes with like heavy sort of romance, almost soap opera themes. Not that I'm not trying to say, oh, romance is bad, but also you're a kid. You're a kid. You're like a small, like, you're at least one of them is prepubescent. You're like in early puberty. Like you don't need to fill your heads with these things. Like romance is just not like the intensity of romance is not part of what needs to be part of your world. Like you're still young enough that it's still fun to just like go outside and pretend to be a dinosaur and like eat leaves until I have to say stop eating leaves. Like that should be, that in general, like again, just looking towards my own childhood as well. Like that's fun. And I think once you move into certain levels of responsibility beyond your household, where I feel like most kids should be focused, like your house and maybe your immediate neighborhood, and like once you start zooming out that far, you're taking on way too big of a burden for what even kids in like wildly impoverished situations aren't putting their stress out there. Their stress would be like, I'm starving. My dad's drunk again. My mom keeps punching me. Like the stressors tend to be tight, but when you start moving out into these like existential, national, that's a huge burden and a huge like quote unquote growing up that I just don't think is remotely necessary. And hilariously, like yeah, she's like right between my two kids, 8 and 10, and my kids are weirdly pro-Trump. My wife doesn't really talk about politics around them or even around me. And I didn't vote for Trump, and I've said I would never vote for him. And I told him I voted for Peter Sonsky. And my daughter Moses almost, she said she wasn't being sarcastic. It felt very sarcastic. She sort of sashayed into the room and was like, so I'm guessing Peter Sonsky didn't win? So she's
Uh,
aware of it. When I asked them, because you had asked, and I was like, oh, I want to do that too. I want to like see what my kids say. And really for them, it was just all about abortion. They were like, oh, because Kamala Harris loves abortion. I was like, okay, well, at least it's connected to a policy. But I also was like, I've had to try to insist. And of course, I'm sure the more I insist it, the more they'll be interested in it. I was like, this doesn't need to matter too much to you guys, just so you know. These things like this politics things, it's something that like, adults get involved with. And even as you grow older, you want to be responsible about it. Once you're 18, you can, I think, really start stepping into that responsibility, or even before, if you thought you feel called to it. But I don't want you to feel pressure that like you have to have a stance, you have to have a position. I think the internet fosters that in our culture pretty aggressively, that everyone needs to have a stance on something. Um, and I
Yeah.
think that could be spurious. Not so good. Yeah, that could be dangerous, man. I'm hopeful in the realm of um, this is a controversial one, guys. I am hopeful for a surprising number of this is a we're not doomed, a surprising number of environmental protections, uh, bills, laws, political state and government and federal government movement on environmental protection over the next 4 years. That was one of the things I liked. I liked the least. I disliked the most about Trump's previous presidency was the rollback of quite a few environmental regulations. And granted, I don't the individual ones. I don't know if they were more practical and helpful than it looks like from the outside. I don't know. However, um, they didn't seem wise to me, and it didn't seem very to be very good caretaking of our environment. But again, because RFK Jr.'s platform on this and a lifetime of advocacy. I mean, that's why he's an environmental lawyer. He's been suing corporations that desecrate the earth for most of his career. It's literally it's what he spent most of his life doing. I'm hopeful that that measure of influence and the fact that I think there's a ton of will for it for environmental protection on the right. I think Republicans and Democrats kind of agree that like we should preserve nature and we should not pollute. I think really the big dispute is like how much of quote unquote carbon emissions are relevant or how much of climate change is human caused, that sort of thing. There's an area of dispute, but our great overlap is like we care about nature and we want nature to be healthy. Um, so that to me is a we're not doomed, is that I'm uh, barring some sort of flame war between the two of them and RFK getting kicked out of the cabinet, within a month of the start of their administration in January. That is a to me a very big we're not doomed.
Yeah. I don't know much about RFK other than what Wikipedia told me, which is that he's an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist.
Right? Sometimes I feel like Wikipedia is basically a human version of politically biased AI.
Could be. Yeah, it was funny how I sort of danced around like who I was, voting for, and I did end up voting for Kamala because at the end of the day, um, as we've discussed on other episodes, I do like the idea of breaking ceilings,
Mm.
such as having a woman president. And then I reconciled myself to saying, if she wins, I'm going to write her a letter.
There you go.
I've almost become a one issue voter on Palestine, which
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think anybody's really. I mean, well, that was my favoring of Jill Stein, but
Yeah.
um, but it was funny because we ended up voting at Georgia's school in the gym,
Oh,
and
that's cool.
yeah, it was they kind of had a nice connection to it, and then they didn't have very many of those little booths, and they were just like, you can just go anywhere. So I'm just like sitting on like a bench,
Yeah.
and Georgia came up and actually saw me like casting my vote. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's that I'm glad that worked out that way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Even though I wish I don't know, yeah, maybe it's like maybe that's the opportunity. Well, I don't know what the opportunity is now. I mean, it's too soon. The Democrats are grieving, but uh, yeah, I mean, as you and I do, like this opportunity to sharpen our swords and to test our theories and to develop more rigorous thought patterns,
Yeah. Yeah.
that opportunity I think exists with her, you know. And yeah, I think that's the way we're not doomed.
Yeah, I think so too. That's the that's the hope is that you can lose battles and win the war, and then also hopefully to realize, and I think kids need to have this more often than they do, where it's like once you have anxiety, so she has this anxiety now about this political thing, and then to see it come to fruition, the things that she was made to be afraid of. By whom? I mean, that's the big thing. I always want to track it. Like, I still can't figure out why my kids were into Donald Trump. I don't know. Other than some kids at school, there was like other kids at school who were like middle schoolers for Donald Trump or whatever. So maybe that just kind of all it took was a little bit of chanting, and then they were like, "That's what we're into." Um, anyway, fascinating. But then to realize like will anything dangerous happen over these 4 years? Meaning, was your fear and anxiety legitimate or was it a lie? Was your body lying to you or your emotions lying to you? Were your thoughts lying to you? Because that certainly happens throughout all of our lives, you know? So in some ways, that's a good lesson to learn. I mean, it can be kind of a weird one, you know? Um, I am hopeful as relates to the war in Gaza. I'm hopeful as to the end of the two wars that I am funding with my tax money that I do not like. Um, Meaning the prevalence of the libertarian streak in this particular administration, or at least the predicted administration. There's even been rumors that Ron Paul might get a call. Uh, would lead us to, if nothing else, to stop funding them. If we could stop giving money to people engaged in war that's not ours. And then my hope would therefore be like, as that financial incentive is diminished, that the incentives to provoke and prompt war would also decrease. And my doom concern is there has been some disturbing movement, and not necessarily Trump, but like this is even my biggest concern about DeSantis was like he had enacted a bill that was like an anti-riot bill. But to me, I was like, ugh, it's right on the fuzzy edge of being an anti-protest bill, which I would never support in a million years. He's also introduced like hate speech laws, which I would never, I don't think we should enhance or increase hate speech laws at all. I think it's an absolutely terrible idea, and the government should never be given any leeway to decide what is and isn't hate speech. But DeSantis did that in Florida with like protection of uh, like punishments for quote unquote anti-Semitism. And I was like, heck no, I don't want people to be anti-Semitic, but I'm a civil liberties person in terms of governance. So people are allowed to say hateful, disgusting things. And I absolutely stand for their right to say hateful and disgusting things. And I certainly don't stand for the government being like, that's too hateful. I don't like it. Incitement of violence, like direct or threat, that sort of thing. Uh, uh, whatever, abundant slander. I'm okay with some of those little edges, little boundaries on it. But that would be my concern is the limitation of protest around the war in Gaza. So it's kind of a bit of a both. It's like, uh-oh, in that case, we could be doomed. But in general, I think the libertarian isolationist bent and the let's stop wasting money thing that Trump ran on very heavily um, is promising in terms of, to me, that seems a more likely route for us to get out of the wars that Biden and Harris helped, or very specifically helped get us involved in. I mean, the Congress is hugely responsible for that, but uh, yeah, I've kind of got it. That's a doom and doom and not doom, almost all in the same time for that exact same issue. And I'm frustrated. Nobody ran on this, Andy. People ran on ceasefire. Cornel West, I think, ran most stridently. I mean, to me, he still remains like the most, like I would say, pro-Palestine candidate that I saw amongst the array. Um, Others ran kind of more on a, hey, let's stop funding wars. Yippee-ki-yay to that. Jill Stein, I think, also inclines better, like more strongly to a ceasefire. But nobody advocated for the very practical thing at this point, which is encouraging and negotiating a surrender. Like, I don't understand how many more people in Gaza have to die for this war to be over. And I'm not advocating like the Hiroshima Nagasaki You know, let's get so crazy that they have to. But I feel like it's already kind of in that heading that it's already sort of in that direction in terms of the volume of people who have been killed. Like when the ceasefire doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's honestly one of the dumbest terms I've ever heard in my life. Nobody wants a ceasefire, really. So then why are you advocating for something you don't want? Nobody wants a ceasefire. Ceasefire just means stop firing for a while. Nobody wants that. I don't want any firing. I want people to stop firing. I want people to stop bombing. Like I don't want anybody sending bombs at anybody. So it's crazy to me that nobody ran on a we will we will reach out, we will fund the rebuilding of Gaza, we will cease funding Israel to bomb Gaza. We'll cease funding. We'll actually have to go and build infrastructure. You can't fund it from the outside, obviously, with Palestine, because then everyone will just say you're funding. You're basically giving them money they won't use for that. They'll use it for war as they have in the past. But I don't understand how no one ran on, we're here to help you negotiate the terms of surrender. And obviously you're going to lose. You lost the war. You're losing the war just like decisively. So you're going to lose more than you're going to gain. But typically in terms of surrender, you gain something. You gain quite a bit. I mean, even when Japan had to surrender and not have a military anymore, that means we had to function as their military. So we've for a while, we've done these we've done these things before, and I don't understand why no one advocated on. I think the reason, honestly, is because very few candidates, especially both of the big ones, didn't really want to talk about it. That's what I pretty much heard through months and months and months of campaigning. Like that would often that question on Gaza would get like often sometimes the shortest answers. And like, well, it's very complicated. That I have to say, in terms like that, in some ways, that is the doom aspect in terms of like this, both of these campaigns and the media were pretty asleep on the job in terms of really holding candidates accountable to actually answer those questions all the way through, specifically related to genocide. I would say on that, so that means abortion, because that's 1 million a year dead. And in Gaza, that's like what, 40,000, 70,000 at this point. It's like it's an enormous number of people. These are huge numbers of intentionally caused deaths that we're responsible for paying for in some situations. And then obviously the lockdowns being, I would say, the largest scale harm from government action ever in human history. Maybe. I mean, obviously we can factor in inflation in that way, but certainly in our lifetime. So that's a doomy aspect on top of the non-doom, is that we just very few things seemed taken very seriously this election.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that would have gone over well to negotiate a surrender, but I think I understand why you're saying it. Is that a
Yeah,
practical level?
yeah. I mean, I just don't know. Listen, I've never run a war, but like, at what point do you just go, okay, now just tens of thousands of citizens are dying. Like, they killed the head of Hamas. I'm sure he's been replaced. Killed a couple, right? So then you're like, okay, like we kind of took out the Hitler, right? You take out the top of the organization and taken out a bunch of his generals. You've taken out the quote unquote bad guy that you claim. I was like, what like, or are we in a never retreat, never surrender? In which case we probably have to stop talking about genocide. But I don't want to keep that out of them. I want to keep that alive as something we need to examine. But if you basically say we're going to fight you until we're all dead, then you can't be like, well, you're killing all of us, because then that's literally what you're saying you're going to do. So then we're actually just engaging on the terms of battle as agreed. I don't understand why anyone would advocate for a ceasefire, because that is definitionally a temporary pause in the conflict. And that just seems, how would anyone want that? I remain baffled.
Well, it reminds me of the sunk cost phenomenon. The
Yeah.
It's been decades of. Hold on, I got.
Yep. Yeah. And I know
I
you're
think
involved in like the Free
to the point
Palestine
of like,
movement. So
do you give in? Do you
yeah.
how and if you're this deeply entrenched, you've resisted this long, do you? What does it mean to officially surrender, even though,
Yeah.
which I don't know, it's an interesting thing to consider because it could, I guess, one positive outcome of that is it could signal to the world like um, it could make it more clear that this was a war and that Israel was the aggressor and they won and that Gaza lost.
Yeah. And which is just normal. I mean, it's just, I mean, sadly normal. I don't like it. I don't think we should be doing it. But yeah, I just don't understand. I don't understand the lack of clarity that, but that's, I think, a doom aspect is I think this election was pretty poorly conducted in terms of getting specific and presenting reason through arguments. I would say less by Trump, just because he talks for, generally tends to talk for 2 or 3 hours, and he's a thinker out loud. So I have a much better sense of at least what he's interested in, why he's interested in it, and what he might try to do about it. Um, but I can't say that he's not a linear thinker, and he's even not like he's kind of ADHD-ish a little bit too, in that he doesn't even necessarily always resolve the thoughts. I mean, I know he says he does, that it all comes back together in this, like, and you're like, oh my gosh, how did he bring all those threads together? I mean, sort of, but it's not he's not offering deep thought. I think JD Vance is a more thoughtful person, so that gives me some sort of hope. Um, and then Harris ran as like I, I mean, to this day, but again, I've said this before, she's possibly the worst presidential candidate I've ever seen in my entire life. She's possibly the worst. Her and George W. Bush, I would say, are very similar to me. And you're like, these people they're not thinking anything through, or at least they're not presenting that they're thinking anything all the way through. And so I was like, my goodness gracious, these are our two candidates. And one is thinking things out loud in front of us. And sometimes I can only partially track what he's talking about. And then the other person, I have no idea what they're thinking because they're not saying anything that really makes any sense. Like that. And then this is the doom part, Andy. 100 million flipping people voted for these two people. Like that's pretty doomy. Like that's kind of worrying, you know? And then I would say even a lot of the third party candidates said things that I was like, what are you talking about?
Well,
The
yeah, I
what,
think that's
go
my
ahead.
to get that excited about either of them to begin with.
Yeah, I don't get
And
it.
it came out, it's actually had a friend over yesterday and we're chatting and this had never come out this way before with me, but I liked it. I just said, it's pretty rare that we find a candidate that is truly worth either glorifying or demonizing,
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
right? And but that's the game, right? Who are you going to glorify and raise far beyond almost being human,
Yes.
and who are you going to demonize? And I'm like, well, what if we just had a real conversation about who they are and
Yeah. What if we
what they
stop playing
represent?
the game, guys?
Um,
Can we just stop playing the game? Just like for a while, remember they canceled all the sports leagues? They were like, you can't play for a while. Like, couldn't we could cancel that, the game. Can we find a way to cancel the game, guys? I think we're doomed if we keep playing it as a game. I mean, it keeps voting up, which I suppose is theoretically supportive of democracy because people get excited about games, but the game doesn't seem to be like helpful in terms of like, let's make decisions, reasonable decisions.
it's basically a sport, and
Yes, that's how
it
people treat it. Yeah.
and I don't know. I think there's lots of ugly things about the highest level of professional sports in terms of being corporations and how they treat
Yeah.
people. Like, wow, there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of comparisons to be
There's
made.
a lot of crossover, man. Especially with the weird venerate, like the obsession with the military industrial complex across both. Every time they have a bunch of troops come out and hold up a flag, or in the NFL sometimes they'll fly flipping jets over the game. I was like, what is happening right now, guys? Why are we co-celebrating war machines as we're like, go Browns? I don't. I don't understand. I've seen a lot of people project this, and you would probably have a different response, but I've seen a lot of people talking about this morning, that this, or last night too, that this election has been a referendum on wokeness, meaning Kamala Harris, arguably the most certainly the most progressive candidate in the her and Waltz are like dyed in the wool, like progressives, which is the most extreme political cohort in the bipartisan spread. They hewed very close to the middle, discussed identity politics. I mean, explicitly, like almost never. Um, Now it was happening outside of them by supporters, so it was still happening. But in terms of, I mean, Trump was running like anti-woke, like said it out loud, and then Harris just didn't really talk about it at all. So it definitely looks like at least the Democrats, in terms of like how they win, they realize, just like Latinx being racist, that like woke had the sort of been a woke backlash, I guess, and then woke is like a very unpopular um, position to support. Now, I thought that would be helpful in terms of, I was like, well, there's a lot of people who are woke, I think, or at least like woke adjacent or culturally informed by woke. But I was like, oh, this will be great because this will drag a ton of people away from that party that's abandoned them. They have one party that's against them, and then they have one party that doesn't attend to them, talk to them, address their concerns, has stopped speaking the same language. So they've sort of like, one is like a faith, the faith, the infidel, essentially. And then the other ones are people who like left the faith, who I think in general, for most religions, that would kind of make you quote unquote worse, worse than those who are against your faith, because they're blind. But the people who are with you and then now have left you are like, oh no, that's way bigger of a heartbreak. But you've been more I think you're more in the center of that. A lot of people view that as a positive because they just view the general thesis, or especially the sort of intersectional as worldview, as like very harmful. So they were celebrating that as like oh, this is a good sign that like we've seen that wave die. But I was wondering from the inside, and I would say we saw it die not just by the lack of attention, but we saw it die by the lack of attention by people who are woke or woke adjacent, and that they abandoned the centrality of that premise in terms of their vote. Because again, we saw, I don't even know, historical lows of voting for third party candidates. I mean,
Mm.
like 0.3% and stuff like that. So then this is to me just like BLM, when BLM gave up caring about like racism and police brutality, when they like shifted over and like, we're going to vote for Biden, a former segregationist, and Harris, who had run as top cop. So I was like, oh, obviously you don't really care. So to me, I was like, that was disappointing, because we've talked very intensely about woke as a religion and as a theory, and what parts of the theory we really should keep looking at, what parts of it I think are harmful. And then to see people just pretty much abandon their religion, or abandon it as any sort of centrality, even though it was continually central. I mean, that could either be a sign of we're not doomed, or a sign of we're doomed, I think very, very strongly. But what was it like kind of being more in the midst or adjacent to that? Because I'm looking at that very much from the outside.
I honestly don't know. I just think the it's become so myopic.
Yeah.
Around here there's signs that say Kamala Harris, obviously. And I think that basically sums up the the approach.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, you're in, or you're the enemy. Um, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see. So, one thing that seems to happen. I mean, I guess in a way, this is, I think, a way we're actually not doomed, is that these things keep swinging back and forth. So, I think in a lot of cases, this will probably create like a resurgence of progressive politics to fight back, and we've got 4 years to take back the White House, kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 Oh, well,
But
speaking of taking back the White House, that's a doom for me, is I'm already seeing it. People are like, huh. So Harris, who is polling more popularly than Biden this time, hence the replacement, um, lost every county, like lost votes in every single county that Biden won in. Biden was a terrible candidate. He ran a terrible campaign, barely campaigned. I mean, he's terrible candidate, meaning that like literally he's been the butt of jokes since before Everyone remembers because I brought it up before in Robin Williams' last stand-up special. He devotes a good like 4 to 6 minutes just literally making fun of Biden. Like Biden is a known goof fool. Like that is like a huge part of like what he is known for, and he's been in like public politics for 40 something years. So helped foster the whatever like tough the crime bill. So helped engineer the military industrial complex, has helped foster the censorship industrial complex now, but had collaborated with segregationists to keep black kids out of white schools. I mean, like he's a terrible candidate and one of the worst candidates you could run in the year that like Black Lives Matter to everybody. He won more votes than Obama. I mean that I mean, let me just say that. To me, that was everyone was like, no election fraud happened. Joseph Biden got more votes than Barack Obama. Barack Obama, I think, he was like as charismatic as Clinton, if not more. He was as eloquent, if not more. Um, Actually, they're very similar eloquence, but I would say his rhetorical style and just like I would even say broader spectrum charisma because he's not as creepy as Clinton was off the charts. So in terms of all the things you want, like a statesman, he was like handsome. He could speak on the cuff. He could read speeches great. I mean, just like Barack Obama was a better candidate than Joe Biden in most of the ways that seemed to matter to the American people, but somehow Biden got more votes than him. I'm very worried. The doom is that now that like they're back in the government and they'll have access to and they'll be like looking through all this government efficiency things they're saying they're going to do, and they're going to hold the FBI accountable and the CIA accountable and the censorship industrial complex accountable and the CDC accountable. Great. The NIH accountable. Great. The NIAID accountable. Great. In the midst of that, my doom concern is that they're going to be like, now we're going to prove. We're going to spend 2 years in this like Russiagate style, like waste of money and time. We're going to prove that the 2020 election was in fact stolen. And I mean, listen, if it really was, then yes, I would love it to be proved. I am so not convinced that it was that it's just weird, but it's weird enough. And people are already talking about it now that they're like, the same guy ran against a candidate polling more popular than the person who beat him. Like it just like it's sort of to a lot of people it doesn't make math sense, and it seems to prove, quote unquote, that the election was stolen. I think it's piss poor proof, and I'm very worried that we're in for 2 years of that. Let me just say a strong word of that crap.
Well, it's not too late for the Democrats to storm the Capitol.
I mean, here's hoping. Democrats rioted in 2016. 200 people were arrested. Cops were injured, sent to the hospital. Like, we're not out of the. I mean, in some ways, I feel like they can't do the Capitol just because like too much deal has been made about like, well, the fact that they attacked the Capitol was somehow bad. Again, I don't understand that argument to this day. I don't think it's a convincing argument. I understand it. I just think it's a piss poor argument. But I am curious. I am curious to see like if people will go mental. I think the fact that people on the left, Democrats, have such a more like a significantly increased rate of mental health issues, but I think it tends towards depression and anxiety, means they're less likely to do things. And they're more likely to like descend into addiction or stay at home and just be like, this sucks. I don't want to do anything. Like, I think that's I think like existential crises are far more likely than like violent action. Although, hey, 2020, but I think 2020 was a little more bipartisan than people painted as in terms of like lockdown protests and BLM protests. I think it was like a lot more like, I mean, who disagrees with this? Lockdowns were a terrible idea. The disproportionate killing of black people by police that's a terrible idea. Like those are just like these are bad things. They're very obviously bad things. Whereas like the election being stolen or whatever, it was just more like I don't know. Was it? I don't know. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if we'll have our own. If January 6th will be fun. Let's make January 6th fun again.
I I have that sense too. I think feel like I sense that Democrats are going to become sad more than angry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
One thing I come back to is that you sent me a tweet, I don't know, a week or two ago that was, I don't know, I want to go back and read it again because I felt like a little over my pay grade, but it was this guy who I think was pretty historically like anti-Trump, and but he was painting a picture of that, and I'm not going to get this quite right, but that Trump had been so beat up by the establishment
Mm.
in the last few years, even after he got out of office in the last 4 years,
Yeah.
that there maybe is some hope that he will actually drain the swamp this time. I don't know.
I know. I don't know. I mean, the cool thing is he has more of his own transition team, and it should be encouraging to everyone that like two like at least the big names in it are former Democrats, or I mean, someone who's running. I mean, both people who have run for president as Democrats, and then the Democrat Party attacked them enough and called them a Russian asset and like basically treated them like trash enough that they're like, okay, all right, I'm not going to hang out with you guys anymore. You're mean. Um, so that is at least promising in terms of like the sense of like bipartisan concerns. That's at least like that gives me somewhat hope. I mean, my constant like tendency towards doomed is that just like I don't know what truth anyone's telling about anything, you know? And
Yeah,
that's probably the biggest doom. Although my biggest doom electorally was Proposition 1 passing in New York. That to me was like, I always can't believe it. Um,
that's a doom.
that's such a doom. I was like, oh, dang, that is so, because it's heading further and further towards my Civil War theory that abortion, like leaving abortion up to states' rights, is so short-sighted, I think. And listen, Trump's been running on it. I think it's a terrible idea. Well, it's your states' rights now. No, rationally, you can't have two states where one, like everyone's like, yep, when you kill these people, it's murder. And then people you literally drive across and they're like, nope, when you kill that person, it's not murder. That's not gonna stand. Like, that's not a stable system. This wouldn't be stable if it was different, like if there were entirely different countries next to each other. This is like, because again, folks, this is like a slavery level conversation where we're basically like, who is human and who deserves general protection and who is rejected for being a human and not deserving of protection. So this is super fundamental and it's not going to last. And so New York passed basically like, they're already one of the more extreme states in terms of legality of abortion, like in the country, in the world. And Proposition 1 essentially, well, very foolishly tries to protect quote unquote reproductive health care. Now they use that word in the law, so I think if I was a lawyer there, I'd be like, oh, cool. Well, that has nothing to do with abortion because reproduction most specifically means the generating of offspring by a species, and offspring occurs embryonically. An embryo is definitionally the offspring literally that we got symmetry of technical terms is the offspring of a species. So specifically an embryo like related to humans. So and healthcare has to do with literally the like producing health benefit. You can't directly kill a person because of whatever a human is a person from the time of fertilization in terms of what the word means in a dictionary. So literally what the word means. So they use that language, which is really shoddy, but also shows how siloed they are that they would use a term that doesn't apply to what they're talking about. But it's provided increased abortion protections. And also, we have some where now Missouri passed a law where abortion is protected in terms of liability. So if like there's medical malpractice, abortion providers are now protected. I mean, it's going so crazy. Like that's crazy. Even if you had 9 months of legal abortion, you don't ever want to have a provider of any type of, if you're calling healthcare, any healthcare, be protected from liability if they literally do the wrong thing. That's how mental crazy you are right now. And then in the Proposition 1 in New York, which passed, is also kind of a Trojan horse because they sold it pretty much as about abortion, but it also includes protections for gender identity and gender expression that are new. and no discrimination against those categories as a subcategory of sex, as opposed to it's in the bill, creed or religion. Whereas gender identity or gender expression is, I don't know where it would go. It doesn't go under sex, but because it's actually just how you express yourself. But then gender identity very much is a creed or religious claim. So that like this, the Atlantic thing you sent where it was like we're living in different realities. And I was like, that of all the things that passed last night, I was like, oh, we're living that's like an entirely different reality that you're proposing and now making laws about. So that was perhaps the most doomy thing because I've never seen anything. I don't think I've ever seen that anything that extreme get passed into law as something that was voted for. And of course, deeply ironic coming from New York State, being that the biggest city there, New York City, discriminated against people on the basis of their vaccine status, such that they wouldn't let them to anywhere indoors, anywhere in the public space. So then the fact that they're like, well, let's go protect people who were not remotely discriminated against to the degree of people we have actively discriminated against. I was like, oh no. That was I'd say that's probably to me the most doomy thing that happened last night. Wasn't presidential.
Hmm.
And left, and again, I've seen left and center biased journalists talk about it as a Trojan horse. They're like, this is not about what they're saying, it's about. But again, this is the biggest doom of all, I guess, beyond the specific doom, is uh based on people I've talked to, again, mostly virtually, but again, this is hundreds of people virtually. We exist in a time of low information, low critical thought to a degree that I never thought was possible, or I never knew existed. Whereas people are very easily convinced by things that aren't true and like openly, like objectively not true, even just like ones you can argue about like what's important or not, but there's many things that are objectively false and people are like, yep, that's exactly what happened. And then don't, and then when you ask people the why or whatever, I don't think many people um, are more functionally informed than your 9-year-old daughter is. And I don't mean that as a disrespect to her. She's flipping 9 years old and she has way cooler things to be focused on.
But she
But
doesn't have the internet.
yeah, right? Right. She doesn't have like full access to the internet where you can actually figure everything out. But like my theory is that this also was a referendum. This election was also a subconscious referendum on the pandemic response, because I do think COVID did a certain amount of damage that we can kind of at least gauge, or at least a strong correlation damage. But how we responded to COVID as a nation and as like a government, certainly, but as a nation and as a people group, like I do think we broke our brains on purpose. And I think this election was pretty strong evidence of that.
Yeah, I have a theory emerging that's maybe explains why Biden got so many votes is well, I guess we won't be able to prove it anytime soon because Trump can't have a third term, but
Yeah.
is just people are just disgruntled and they're mainly
Yeah.
voting on just change. They're mainly voting,
Yeah.
Kamala's trying to run on change, and it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean Trump. I think they both have pretty weak arguments in terms of like change, but in terms of like
Yes.
just changing the figurehead,
Yeah.
there's like this temporary solve of just like okay, great, we got rid of that person, so maybe everything will be better.
Yeah. Maybe it'll be better. I mean, in that case, whoops, everything got worse. But literally in every And that's the crazy thing, right? We voted that. And maybe that's why I think this is subconsciously part of it. And I agree. I think people are also bored. People were stuck at home for a long amount of time. And then they're like, what else are we going to do but vote? I don't know. I mean, that's something to do. It kind of feels important and fun. So maybe. But the funny thing is, like, very clearly, in terms of like what everyone was worried about at the time in 2020, this is why no one talking about the most, the largest social upheaval in any of our lives. No one has ever lived through anything like that grand scale upheaval where literally like entire cities were shut down, airports were shut down. You know what I mean? They just shut down everything for a while and then made you shut your business down for months and months and months, someplace like half a year. That's never happened. So it was the biggest thing. And so I think people were just like, oh my gosh, how do we get out of this? And then the hilarious thing is, after they voted for Biden, like cases went up deaths went up. The majority of deaths, COVID deaths, happened under Biden. The vaccine segregation, it's like citywide hate-based segregation happened. Like we literally made everything worse by voting for Biden. And I honestly think the fact that nobody talked about that as Democrats was a huge error. Had they just said, oh my gosh, we messed up so bad, they could have even blamed it. They could blame it. Trump could have blamed his mistakes on China. And then the Democrats could have blamed their mistakes on Trump because he's the one who started lockdowns. So they could have just been like, you know what, we're really trying to provide. We knew the American people needed continuity in that time. And especially because you're already changing a leader in the middle of a crisis, we knew we wanted to like have a continuous flow so as not to disrupt society. So we just kept doing what he did. It's all his fault. They could have both passed the buck. It's very easy to negotiate out. And so the fact that they didn't, I think, uh, like kind of tells us like all we need to know because we know all that subconsciously because again there was tickers on the bottom. Maybe they took their tickers off once Biden was in office. Maybe they didn't. But most of all the damage that happened under Biden, and he increased the damage through his actions, and he threatened 100 million people from the White House. You know, I mean, we all saw it, we all heard it. And the sad thing is, I've talked to so many people, and this is kind of a doom, is that the not doom is the fact that this was, I think, a subconscious like repudiation of those attempts. Um, but the doom is, I've talked to again hundreds of people who basically still live in the world where all those things were justified, all those things were beneficial. I've never talked to anybody who's provided any evidence for that. And you can pile evidence on top of them and they just go, no. And I've talked to so many people, even in the past like 2 or 3 weeks, who have openly said like hateful and dehumanizing things about the 100 million people that Biden threatened. And I've never talked to anyone who's ever said anything even close to what I've heard from dozens and dozens and dozens of people out of their own little typing fingers. I've never heard anyone say anything about that, even about illegal immigrants, right? Which I'd say is the category most vilified by the right. Thanks to Trump. Thanks a lot, buddy. Um, so that to me is it's the like not doom, and then it's a doom because I cannot believe the degree of dehumanization openly that people are engaging in. And I don't, since both Harris, Biden, and Trump have engaged in that sort of talk, I don't see any signs of that slowing down. Oh, I didn't mean to end on a doom note. Give me we're not
Well,
doomed, Andy, so we can finish this.
well, okay, this might be a related, not doomed.
Yeah,
I just feel it's true for me, and I've had a couple conversations. People aren't exactly relating it to everything you just said, but
yeah,
we're almost at 5 years since uh, since COVID arrived in America
yeah.
officially, and the lockdowns happened, and you know, I don't know. I just sense there's a reckoning. Like there's something about half a decade, and people are actually starting to pay attention to. And this is true for me. I was like, I met
Yeah.
up with somebody I was supposed to meet up with right before COVID, and like everything stopped, and the email was just sitting there for years, 4 years, and
Wow.
I'm like, oh yeah, how about we get that lunch? So I feel like you know, and I think in that inevitably people might consider some of what happened with COVID more broadly and in terms of policy, but even just I don't know. I don't want to get past it in the sweep it under the rug sense that we were talking about earlier, but I don't know, get past it in the sense of actually healing and reckoning with it in a
That's
real
yeah,
way.
that's my dream. Yeah. I'm hopeful, but I'm hopeful in a way that I'm like, I will not remotely hold my breath because I would die of asphyxiation. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm hopeful even the fact that like the influence of quote unquote Christian culture, supposedly 68% of the country are professing Christians. I believe the real number is probably closer to 10 to 20%. But uh, for like apology and forgiveness is fundamental to that ethos, to that religion. Also, the popularity of therapy, like the religion of people who are in therapy, I think is a really dominant religion in our culture. Um, And I mean that because I know plenty of people who say, just like someone would be like, well, I can't date him. He's not Jewish. I know plenty of people who say, red flag, I can't date him. He's not in therapy. Um, I've heard the latter many more times than I've heard any other excuse for why you can't date somebody. Since we're such a therapeutically obsessed culture, we can't not learn the lesson that you can't just not talk about the past, and you can't just not talk about trauma. You have to face it. You have to immerse yourself in it. You have to literally like expose yourself to it until it loses its power. So I'm hopeful, even though today might be an anxious, depressing day for people, that they already begin that process of like, let's face up to everything that brought us here, and then we can start saying sorry, all the sorries we need to say, and doing all the forgiveness that we need to do, and we can actually heal and actually move forward in hope. And a more important change than who's sitting in a chair in the Oval Office.
Well, maybe you should be a politician.
Certainly thought about it. It might be fun. I think it'd be really, really annoying. It does
Yeah,
sound like
super.
maybe one of the most annoying jobs in the world, especially if you were like a true believer. Like you were like, I'm really going to go. I have some ideas that I really think will help, and I can't wait to make these happen.
Yeah.
But it might be annoying in a satisfying way. I don't know.
Well, maybe that highlights the doom and not doom of the machine.
Of the entire machine.
I truly
Yeah.
think there's only so much anyone can do. That's
Yeah.
kind of by design.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't help too much. We can't hurt too much.
I
Well,
am I'm going with not doomed.
yeah, I'll stay with not doomed, even though I feel like I've become more doomy over the course of this conversation.
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
Hmm.
But I think I mean, part of it is just like the gritting teeth of feeling not doomed. I think the hard part for me, again, is as a Christian, is that um, and an empiricist, all things tend towards entropy, and the nature of mankind is ultimately imperfect, and even rebellious against perfection and righteousness. So then I consider the trajectory to be generally in the most important senses down. But I'm not hopeless in terms of like, I think we can improve material conditions, which will at least decrease suffering, decrease harm, like in an open way, in which case I'm on that premise, I am choosing to say we're not doomed. So thank
Well,
you for helping me feel not so doomed.
thank you. And this your friendship, your love, our interactions, this show helps me feel not doomed.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Even if we're all going down, we all go down together. I love you, Andy.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.